So anyway, welcome to the Nature Vancouver April Birders Night. Thank you all for coming. As we said, it's moved forward a little bit from the April 6th date because we have a special presentation that where the speaker could only make it on early in the month. So thanks for adjusting your schedule a little bit. My name is Harvey. I've been a member of Nature Vancouver for about 10 years now. My partner Michelle and I actually became birders in 2012 during a previous trip to Mexico. We had rented a house in the hills above the city of Oaxaca in Oaxaca State, and our yard was absolutely chock full of flowering plants. On most mornings, we'd have breakfast up on the roof deck and watch all the beautiful birds that would come to enjoy the yard. And there were so many that we just had to try to learn to see what some of them were. When we got back to Vancouver, it occurred to us that there are birds here too, and that maybe we should make a bit more of an effort to learn something more about them. We were on an outing at Iona Beach when we stumbled across a Nature Vancouver field trip, and they invited us to tag along, and we found that we learned an awful lot by going out with a group full of knowledgeable people. And we ended up joining Nature Vancouver and continued to learn a lot from going on field trips and attending evening presentations. So it's nice to be able to give a little back to the group by presenting tonight. What I'm talking about is a trip that we did, Michelle and I, last November and December to parts of Mexico. But I also want to talk a little bit, so my presentation isn't just a bunch of vacation slides.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry.
I'm not sure if you're sharing.
Oh, I apologize. I'm not sharing my slides. I thought it was set up, but I missed a very important step. So thank you, Michelle, for pointing that out. Let me share my screen. And that's good. There we are. So I didn't miss much, just a stone statue of what is probably an eagle. But anyway, so this isn't just a presentation of my vacation slides. I want to talk a little bit about what we did to plan the trip in case that information is useful to anybody else here as you're thinking about going somewhere yourselves. So one approach to trip planning is figure out where you want to go. There are obviously a lot of options. Figure out what you can do while you get there. And if you want to do birding, well, this is a map from eBird of eBird hotspots, and you can see they're all over the world. Then you work out the details of how to do what it is that you want. Or another approach is to start with what you want to do, like birding, figure out where you can go to do it, and then work out the details. And for most trips, we end up kind of going back and forth between those two things as we refine our plans. Michelle and I love to travel, and we really love birding. But birding isn't usually the main reason we travel somewhere. For us, birding is a way to kind of force ourselves to see things a little differently than we might otherwise. Michelle wrote about birding on a recent trip to Mexico. It made visiting places we've been before, like Oaxaca, new. It took us to places where we wouldn't have gone otherwise and showed us things we wouldn't otherwise have known, like the early morning running culture in the Parque Macbiltepec in Jalapa, or the damage from Hurricane Agatha in Oaxaca State. Birding gets us a bit off the beaten track. So the idea for this trip started with me daydreaming about going to Egypt, but after some back and forth, we ended up deciding to go to Mexico. I was suffering from several months of post-COVID fatigue while we were planning the trip, and we'd been to Mexico, and it seemed like it would be an easy destination in case I continued to have problems from the COVID. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. But anyway, when you're thinking about Mexico, well, Mexico, the question is where in Mexico to go. Mexico is a very large and diverse country. And even with 6 weeks, we could only hope to see a tiny part of it. You can see the dots here. Those were the places that we ended up deciding to go on our trip. But you know, this is the topography of the country. There is a lot of options. Because I had this low energy while we were making plans, we decided to spend most of our time in the valleys of Oaxaca. It was a place that we had been before, so we already knew how to get around, and we knew that there was lots to see and do. And we knew that there were lots of birds that we hadn't managed to see in our previous trip because we just didn't know enough. So we figured that it would be a good opportunity. And then we had to decide when to go. So weather is somewhat important. We prefer not to go places while it's pouring rain. We were considering for Oaxaca when the rainy season is. So like many places in the tropics, they have a rainy season. For Oaxaca, that ends in September with sometimes a bit of a hangover into October. The other question is, could we get accommodations and how expensive would it be? So peak tourist periods in Oaxaca are like Christmas, Easter, and the Day of the Dead. And accommodations are more expensive and they can be hard to come by in the peak periods. But we decided that we were going to go in just after the start of the peak at the Day of the Dead. Okay, so we decided that we were going to go just after the big holiday of the Day of the Dead in early November, stay about 6 weeks so that we could be back home with family in time for Christmas. And then the next question, of course, is how you get there. We knew that flying to Oaxaca is kind of expensive and it's pretty inconvenient. Most itineraries we could find from Vancouver involve multiple hops and usually an overnight stay somewhere. We didn't really fancy doing that when it's only a 5-hour flight to Mexico City or most of the resort towns. So we decided not to fly directly. Bus service in Mexico is great and it's very affordable. And so we decided we would take the cheapest flights we could get, or most convenient flights, and then take the bus around within the country. So what we ended up with was a decision that we would fly into Mexico City, which is on the map here. If I can get my mouse pointer up there, I hope people can see the mouse pointer moving around. And then we flew out from the resort town of Huatulco in the south of Oaxaca state here. And then we had to pick the itinerary of where we were going to go in between. And here we turned to eBird to look for ideas on where to go because we knew we wanted to do some birding. And so we thought, okay, well, let's see where in Mexico that's convenient or sort of in between our two endpoints. Is it good to go birding? And we looked, and well, Oaxaca is quite a good area with somewhere in the 300 to 400 species recorded. There were much more birdie hotspots just a little bit north of there in the state of Veracruz. And we couldn't ignore those. So we decided we wanted to travel to some of that. But because of time and budget constraints, we couldn't go everywhere. So we ended up picking the town of Veracruz here on the coast, on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, and the city of Jalapa in the mountains near the Gulf Coast, and then our time in Oaxaca. So once we knew that sort of where we were going and that we wanted to do some birding, we thought, okay, well, it would be really handy to have a guide. In previous trips that we've done, we've managed to find some local guides, and we've always found that added a lot to our experience. The local guides know all the birds, they know where to find them. You see an awful lot more in a short period. But when we started looking for guides for Mexico, what we found was that it's easy to find dedicated birding trips, but it was really hard to find just a guide here and there who would take you out for a day. In fact, we didn't find any guides that we could book before we left Vancouver for Mexico. The birding trips, the dedicated trips, were a bit expensive. They weren't necessarily happening when we wanted to be there. The local guides, they mostly didn't have web pages. Some of them were on Facebook, but it's hard to search on Facebook to find a big list. And the guides that we did find, well, one had moved away from the place we wanted to go, one had retired from guiding, One wouldn't tell us the price that he would charge for services, even though we had 3 to 4 exchanges. When I finally said, look, we can't go much further unless we have some idea how much this is going to cost, he said, maybe you're not the guide for me. And others didn't reply to our emails at all. We've since found that there's a group on Facebook called Birding Travel, where people ask questions and other people reply. And had we known about that before the trip, it might have saved us a lot of trouble. So that's worth checking out if you're going traveling somewhere and want to find birding. They also will give you recommendations on where to go to look for birds, how to access them, places to stay, whatever you're interested in birding related travel. So probably a good resource. What did work for us, in Veracruz, we found a tour that included a half day with some birding in a mangrove swamp and then a visit to an archaeological site. So it was a little prepackaged tour, but it was a short-term thing, and it happened to have some of the activity we wanted. We were interested in both those things, so it was a good fit for us. Another option is to book a different experience, something you want to do, and then ask their tour operator if they know a birding guide in the area. And that's how we found some of our guides in Oaxaca when we were there. And another thing that worked was when we were looking for accommodations. In places where there are birds, sometimes some of the accommodations will list a birding opportunity or a birding excursion on their website. And or you can even just contact the hotel and see if they can give you a recommendation for a local guide. And that worked for us in one location as well in San Jose del Pacifico. Another way that we prepared for the trip was to try to research the birds that are in the region. And for this, eBird was hands down the best resource. eBird, you can see the map of hotspots, and for each hotspot, eBird offers a bar chart that will tell you how commonly birds have been reported or how frequently birds have been reported at each time of year. So if you look at this, this is a bar chart for the park in Jalapa, and the plain chachalaca is very common throughout the year. The rock pigeon is, rock pigeons are less common than plain chachalaca, so they're easy to see. One of the birds Michelle absolutely wanted to see on our visit to Mexico, we had never seen before, but it looked cool from the pictures, was a squirrel cuckoo. It has a cool name, it makes a cool sound. It's a very neat looking bird. And in this park, we knew we would have a pretty good chance of seeing it. So that was great. The other thing is that I'm going to click through here to that eBird bar chart. So you see here 273 species have been reported throughout the year. That may be a little small on the monitor, but that's what it says. If I click on the month of November, which is when we were there, that brings it down to 137 species. So you don't have to research what all 273 species are. You can just look at what are the more common species during the time you're going to be there. And then it has links to the species. So we can click on the plain chachalaca and bring up a description of the chachalaca, a range of where that is found, a little bit of information about its life history, and similar birds. You can listen to the call, all kinds of stuff. So that was really an absolutely phenomenal resource for trip planning. Go back to full screen here. All right. The other really good resource for planning was the Merlin Bird ID app. I kind of wish they had a website version of it, but they don't really. It's really something you can only get on your phone or tablet, but it's still a fantastic resource. They have regional packs for almost anywhere you want to go in the world. And if you download the right region pack, then you get pictures of the birds, you get recordings of the sounds, so you can learn what they sound like. And even better, it has a sound ID feature, which doesn't work for all species, and it doesn't work well in all regions, but almost anywhere you go, it will identify some of the birds. And it helped us in a number of cases to be confident that we had got our bird ID correct, because our phones were telling us that the call was from the kind of bird that we thought we were seeing. So it was absolutely a fantastic resource. Some of our guides also made quite a lot of use of Merlin to share information with us. And paper guidebooks are still useful. Books often provide a bit more information than you will get in an app, and they give an overview of all the birds that are in the region that you can easily flip through in a way that is somewhat challenging with any of these online methods that we've found. So that brings us to the actual trip. That was kind of the start of the trip. Now, one of the other nice features of eBird is that you can do a trip report. You can say, I'd like a trip report for a start date and time and an end date, up to an end date and time, and it'll put all your checklists for that onto a map. It will list all of the species.
Harvey's audio cut out and he's just working on getting it back.
Okay, there are my slides back. Can somebody tell me where I was when I cut out? Had I moved to change this slide already, or was I back still on the previous slide?
Previous slide.
Okay. There we go. All right. I see. I've moved away from the slides. That's what the problem is. Yeah. So I just clicked this link to bring up the eBird trip report. So eBird has this great feature that lets you do trip reports. So this trip report is for the period from the 21st of November to the 21st of December. It's the one thing that's annoying about it. You have a limit of 30 days in your trip report, but this covers the entire period pretty much that we were in the state of Oaxaca. You can see all of the places where we went birding during that time. And it does a summary of the number of species that we had observed, a list of all the species that we observed. It tells us which ones it thinks are our life birds. It's exaggerating a little bit because it doesn't have all of our history. We had seen some of those birds before, but many of them are there. So it's telling me we saw 221 species in that month in the state of Oaxaca, and 144 of those were birds that we had never seen before. I'm sure at least 100 of them were. We recorded 70 checklists. We only uploaded photos of about 3 species. But that's neat, and we use that feature quite a lot. I used that in order to make all of these maps that you'll see in the presentation. So we landed in Mexico City, and for birding purposes, we'll skip all of that. And we caught a bus from there to the town, or the port city of Veracruz, which is the largest port in Mexico and more or less the location where Hernan Cortes made landfall when he arrived in 1521. We had, the one thing we had managed to arrange from Canada was this little half-day birding thing at a mangrove swamp just north of the city, and then a visit to an archaeological site. While we were in Mexico City, we found on Airbnb Experiences that somebody was offering a kayaking trip in another mangrove swamp south of the city. So we signed up for that too. And so that was our first day there. To get from Mexico City to Veracruz, we traveled by bus. Buses in Mexico, as I said earlier, are fantastic. They have free Wi-Fi, they've got air conditioning, and it's all climate controlled and comfortable. You can watch Power Rangers or whatever movie they happen to be playing. If you're getting tired of looking at the scenery, looking out the window. In the rest of our travels, we made a lot of use of what are called collectivos. They're basically shared taxis. They run a fixed route and they leave when they're full, which is usually a minimum of 4 people, 3 in the back and the 1 in the front, but sometimes 5. They crowd an extra person in between the driver and the passenger in the front there. They're very inexpensive. They run pretty efficiently. It's pretty rare that the drivers will speak English, and but it does happen. But they really get you where you need to go. You can also hire a taxi to get wherever you want, and for a fairly reasonable rate as taxis go. But we were traveling on a tighter budget, so collectivos were our second choice. The city of Heroica, Veracruz, on the coast there is a place we had been before, and we had quite fond memories of it as a city where pretty much every night of the week there would be people out in the central square with music and dancing and just a lively street life. We found that was still the case every night that we were there. There was music and dancing in the square. So it was a pleasant place to be, although most of the tourists who go there are Mexicans, not foreigners. A nice thing about going birding in another country is that pretty much any bird you see, there's a good chance it's one you don't have at home. And this was no exception. Right in the middle of town, we ran into great-tailed grackles, maybe the most common bird in Mexico. This female is, I think, more handsome than the males. The males are all a glossy black and do look quite striking, but the females are pretty attractive here, and they have this wonderful long tail. Walking down to the docks in the port city, you can see a usual kind of collection of seabirds. This particular photo, we've got at least 1 gull species. We think it's a laughing gull. You have a lot of terns. These ones are royal terns. This was non-breeding season. So in the breeding season, I think their caps are all black pretty much. But here they have this monk's tonsure black strip around the back of their head that I think looks pretty cool. And we had 1 little ruddy turnstone hanging out on the dock with all these other birds. There were sandwich terns, and there were frigate birds and other things on the wind. It was nice to just walk around town and take in the sights and also see the occasional bird while you were there. And then that next morning, we went on our kayaking trip in the Laguna Mandinga Grande, this mangrove swamp. Our guide, Francisco, was a biologist, but not a birder. So he gave a great tour with lots of information about the plants and the ecology of the region and the history and culture. But we were a little bit frustrated as birders that he couldn't help us identify some of the birds we wanted to see. And so we saw lots of birds that we couldn't identify. He did help with a lot, so it was still a good trip, but not a birding guide. This is just a little slide of a tunnel in the mangrove swamp, which is a very cool place to enter. Most of the time we were kind of on a lake. Another real highlight of that trip was seeing a breeding colony of the magnificent frigate birds. So the males look like this. They have this red pouch that they can inflate so that it attracts the females who look or black and white and look like that. Mostly when we've seen frigate birds in the past, and always when we've seen frigate birds in the past, it was just soaring on the wind. I think they really only roost a lot during the breeding season. And that was cool to see. There were also a lot of neotropic cormorants in that colony, but I didn't get a picture of them. Here's a shot of the frigate birds on the wind and the male with pouch inflated. This is from eBird. It's not something I took. So the next day, we went on our one arranged event for a whole 6-week tour. And a local tour company found an English-speaking guide who was very experienced. He had 20 years of experience as a guide, take us up to La Mancha and the mangroves there. We were expecting another day in the mangrove swamp, much like the previous one, thinking we'd see much the same sort of bird life, but that was not the case at all. There was a separate birding guide there, this fellow Enrique. He took us on a walking tour adjacent to the mangrove swamp, and we went through farm fields and coastal sand dunes. Some of the birds from the swamp flew over. We walked through the forest a little bit, so there was a lot of diversity. We saw 31 species, including 2 that we were really hoping to find. I was super excited to see my first Aplomado falcons. They were on a little tree just kind of down on the coast there. There's a distant view through the spotting scope, but still we could see them reasonably well. And the cell phone photo through the spotting scope, so it only it doesn't capture quite as well as what we saw. But it was very cool. Another thing we found early on here at La Mancha is that the sound ID feature, the Merlin Bird ID app, was quite useful. Now I'm going to find out that I did something dumb when I started my Zoom share, so I'm going to apologize and stop sharing. And share my screen again. And this time turn on sound and video sharing so that I can do this. Apologize for that. Okay, so hopefully I should be sharing again. And now I can play the sound of the Montezuma Oropendulo. So that sound greeted us as soon as we got out of the parking lot. And try as I might, I could not see the bird. But the Merlin Bird ID app was able to record that and identify the bird for us. And then we could tell that to our guide, who could explain that, yes, in fact, they spent the night in the trees above the parking lot, but you would never see them there. And before first light, they left those trees and headed out to their feeding areas in the coast. And we did actually see a couple on the wing, not well enough to get any photos, but that was very cool. We also saw a big flock of parrot-like birds fly in. And I don't know if you've ever tried to ID parrots, but usually the difference is like the color of their forehead or some small thing like that. And the sizes tend to overlap quite a lot and whatnot, and it's hard. But the sound ID was able to take that and tell us that they were green parakeets. So that was pretty cool. And we were hearing those calls, and that's the call of the melodious blackbird. They don't look like much. They look a lot like our brewer's blackbirds, but they make a whole array of quite amazing noises, which we heard all throughout Veracruz. They were in Jalapa as well. And there are a lot of birds that look kind of similar. And in this case, the Sound ID app was to take just that little squeaky call. I'll play it again. Whoops. And tell us that it was a great kiskadee and not some other similar looking bird, which, since we were fairly fresh in the country and not familiar or confident of our ID, looking at all these very similar looking birds, that was really a big help. So I really appreciated that aspect of the app. The second half of our tour was going to that archaeological site I mentioned, Zempoala. Zempoala was the capital of the Totonac Empire, and it was the first urban settlement that Cortez and his Spaniards encountered on their arrival on the American continent. The Totonac people had been conquered by the Aztecs a few decades prior to the arrival of the Spanish, and they were very heavily taxed, both for goods and for victims for sacrifice. And so initially they were very, very happy to ally with Cortez to overthrow the Aztecs. In fact, that conquest would have been impossible without that choice. I don't know whether they regretted it later, but at the time, it seemed like the best option. So our guide, after our visit to the archaeological site, which was somewhere around here, brought us back to Jose Cardel, and we hopped on the bus for about an hour and a half ride to the city of Jalapa. Jalapa is situated in a range of volcanoes that stretches north-south across this part of Mexico. Like Vancouver, the mountains squeeze the rain out of the prevailing winds, so it's basically situated in a rainforest, and everything at Jalapa is lush and very green. These are a few scenes from Jalapa. This was the courtyard of our, Michelle tells me, $56 a night hotel. It had a very comfortable room as well. And you can see the volcanoes here off in the distance. That's a little cone there and another larger one. You can see the very steep streets on the hillside. We went birding in this lovely park, Parque Macuiltepetl, which is the summit of an extinct volcano that is in the center of town. And that's just a grocery store with a bunch of dried peppers. For our birding in Jalapa, we really wanted to find a guide, but we couldn't find one. You know, this was the case where the guy had retired or moved away or didn't answer our emails. So instead, we stayed at a nice older hotel in the center of town and went to city parks that were hotspots on eBird. The eBird hotspot at Parque Macuiltepetl has 273 species with 137 species recorded for November. So that was up here. So we went there a couple of times. We managed to find 41 species, to identify 41 species during our visit, including several lifers. Of course, we saw a lot more than that, but just because we were unfamiliar with them and the effort involved in the IDing, it took us time. That was all we could do. On our first visit, the Parque Macuiltepetl was absolutely chock full of warblers. And Michelle and I have never paid much attention to warblers because they never sit still. And they're hard to see as they flit around the tops of the trees. But there were so many there that we couldn't ignore them. We saw 7 species of warblers, at least, including lots of Townsends and black-throated green warblers, black and white warbler, and some of the ones that we see here. So that was very special for us, and started something kind of that we continued for the rest of the trip. We didn't get any pictures though, because the warblers never sit still, unfortunately. We did see this guy, which is a roadside hawk. It's fairly similar in size and habits, I think, to a Cooper's. Looks a lot like a Cooper's, but again, the Merlin Bird ID, sound ID, helped us confirm that it was the roadside hawk that we had identified it as. This is that plain chachalaca that I talked about. The guidebooks, these things are about the size of a large chicken, and the guidebooks say that you will easily find the plain chachalaca because as it comes crashing through the brush. They tend to travel in flocks. Supposedly they make a lot of noise. The ones that we saw were fairly quietly walking along the forest floor. But there's a group of, I'd say about 6 of them. And we got a nice look, although not a great photograph. The Merlin Sound ID app told us that some of the calls we were hearing were the black-headed saltator. So this is the first place we encountered them. This photo is actually from Pluma Hidalgo, because at Macuiltepetl we only heard the saltators. But it's another quite interesting, roughly crow-sized bird that I had been hoping to see on this trip. So we need to encounter them there. We spotted this blue-capped motmot. Unfortunately, I didn't get a good shot of his tail. They have these really cool, almost detached, like tassels at the end of their tail feathers. That is very neat, but I didn't get a shot of that. Still a really splendid bird to see. But while we loved our time in Jalapa, we had booked ourselves into Oaxaca for a month, and so it was all too soon time to go. And we got on the bus for our 8-hour trip from Jalapa down to Oaxaca. We came across here via Puebla, and down there, covering a real range of landscapes. We started off in rain and kind of cloud / rainforest. We moved through arid region with all these Joshua trees, and in spots along the spine there, you pass through almost semi-desert in the rain shadow with all these tall cactus growing along the side of the road. So quite a mix of stuff as we went along the highway. Everywhere, lots of evidence of the volcanic origins of most of Mexico. Things that you could see from the side of the road. The valleys of Oaxaca, well, Oaxaca state itself consists of these three main valleys surrounded by mountains. And so we have the Etla Valley in the north. I forget what this is called. I forget what the other two valleys are called. They all sort of meet here near the capital city, Oaxaca. It was also the capital in ancient times when the Zapotec people built their religious center and administrative area here on the small mountain of Monte Alban. That was the site of one of the earliest cities in Mesoamerica. They had a lot of advances. We'll talk a bit more about them later. After the conquest, Hernan Cortez was named Marquess of the Valles of Oaxaca. He kind of chose this area along with some others as his personal fief in the New World. It was in part because the valley was a major source for cochineal, which was an insect, scale insect that is a parasite on the nopal cactus. But it was the source of the first really good red dye. So, for example, the British military uniforms, the redcoats, or the Mounties red serge, they were originally dyed with cochineal. Until it was replaced by synthetic dyes, the cochineal trade brought in as much money as the silver trade to Mexico. And Oaxaca was a real central region for that. So it was a wealthy area. Now, unfortunately, Oaxaca is kind of one of the poorest states in Mexico, but it's still a splendid place to go as a tourist. And you can see from this is a map of the eBird hotspots. All of those, whoops, sorry, I moved away there. All of these orange and red areas are places where there are a lot of different bird species recorded. And the green ones are still pretty darn good places to go birding. So we had some idea from eBird about where to go. The history of humans in Oaxaca extends back at least 12,000 years. So there are caves near the town of Mitla, which contain evidence of the earliest known cultivation of corn in the Americas. They found cobs of teosinte, or a cultivated form of corn, early corn, in these caves, along with squash seeds and other signs of agriculture, some stone tools, and cave paintings like the one on the one shown here. There's also one of the oldest trees in the world is just outside the city of Oaxaca at a place called Tule. It's a Montezuma cypress. It's maybe the largest tree in the world by girth. Its girth is something like 37 meters. Stepping under its branches is an experience that it certainly strikes awe in me. It's much like stepping into a truly magnificent Gothic cathedral or something like that. It brings up a real sense of awe and wonder, and a neat place to go, a neat thing to see and experience. This is the summit of Monte Alban, which is that ancient city, ancient capital that I mentioned earlier. The Zapotec people literally leveled the top of this mountain by hand. They didn't have pack animals. They didn't use wheeled vehicles or anything. Every single stone on here was carried by people, and or maybe rolled on logs or something, but moved by people power. They also used the Maya calendar, or what was later called the Maya calendar, the same Mesoamerican calendar, and had fairly advanced knowledge of astronomy. This is a sundial they have there that is currently showing noon as we're taking that picture. There's evidence that the people of Monte Alban taught astronomy to the people of Teotihuacan, closer, a more famous site closer to Mexico City. These ruins at Monte Alban are also listed by eBird as one of the top birding hotspots in the region, with 244 species. Now, that's mostly because just a little bit off to the left of where we're standing here, there is a banding station, and the banders eBird what they catch in their nets. So that leads to a lot. But we saw about 20 species of birds there, even though we were mostly spending our time looking at ruins and only kind of birding incidentally. So there are a lot of birds, lots of vultures, a few crested caracaras, that kind of eagle, many hummingbirds, some warblers, and others. In the parking lot of Monte Alban, we saw this female ladder-backed woodpecker excavating a nest. I hope the video is working for you all. It's always a little bit of a gamble doing video over a Zoom call, but we watched her for, I would say half an hour, just building her nest there. It was really quite something. She was very determined, didn't really care that there were cars coming and going nearby or tourists in the area. Unfortunately, when we went back a week later, the branch had broken, so maybe she didn't make the best choice of where to excavate, but it was definitely an amazing experience for us to see. Sorry, I had to do something funny because of the video there. It'll take me a moment to get the presentation back up. Zoom quit unexpectedly again.
I can still hear you.
Yeah, you can still hear me. Do I have Zoom? Is it reconnecting, or do I have to do something?
We can hear you.
We can.
You can hear me. Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Good. Then I will put it back to full screen and continue. So, one of the birds we saw in the ruins there was this rock wren. They were mostly pretty shy, but this guy let me get pretty close and take a nice picture. Oops. I apologize for the flaky Zoom here. Okay, I think I'm sharing screen again. There we go. So after we'd been in Oaxaca for about 2 weeks, we managed to arrange a birding guide. Michelle spotted a notice on the bulletin board at the Oaxaca Lending Library, which is an organization that helps expatriate tourists in the city of Oaxaca. And so we hooked up with Edgar Del Valle, who is an amazing birder. With his help, going out with him, we saw a lot more birds. We saw 70 species on the first day we went out with him versus typically 20 to 30 that we have been averaging on our own outings in the area. One big difference was the unfamiliar species. So on our own outings, we'd find 2 or 3 lifers, and as birds we've never seen before, it would take us a long time to identify them. Whereas with the guide, he was able to ID them immediately. Plus, he knew all the calls of the birds and where to look for them. Our guide was Edgar Del Valle, who's an amazing birder. He runs the banding station in the Botanical Garden in the center of town, and he's also involved in that banding station I mentioned in Monte Alban. So it turns out he knows Yusif Atiel. They were at the Long Point Bird Observatory at the same time. So some of you will know Yusif, and it's kind of a small world. We had no idea before we went that we'd hook up with him. But anyway, one of the birds that we managed to get a photo of in Teotitlan del Valle. So our first trip with him was to Teotitlan del Valle, to the east of the city of Oaxaca. And we started out in some farmland. They farm these nopal cactus, both for the fruit that you see and for the cactus pads, which are eaten. And they are also home to this gray-breasted woodpecker. We went to a stream, and there we saw this green kingfisher. Sorry, it's not a great photo. There were also great egrets and snowy egrets and a little blue heron. Managed to get some pictures of crested caracara, which is technically a kind of falcon, but it's a small eagle. It's a bit smaller than the bald eagle, but they're fairly common in Mexico. Very, very dramatic. That orange part on their bill is skin, and then the kind of actual beak underneath, different feathers. Anyway, these white-throated towhees, we saw lots of them. The vermilion flycatcher is that brilliant red bird at the upper right here. These are least grebes. They are just a bit smaller than our pied-billed grebe, which is also found in the area. And then this is a male blue grosbeak. They're in non-breeding plumage, but you can still see some of the blue, and really quite an attractive bird. We enjoyed going out with Edgar so much that we booked him for a second day. We went to the Arroyo Guacamaya north of the city and saw another 63 species there. We spent several hours looking at warblers, including this Nashville warbler. There were so many Townsend's warblers there that we kept going on about the thousands of Townsend's. So the summer tanager, brilliant red bird. Lots of hummingbirds, including this Mexican violet ear, which we heard sing. It was quite fun. Several slate-throated redstarts, also painted redstart, and some other things. One bird we spent a long time looking for but didn't actually get to see was this blue mockingbird. We heard it. We were probably standing within 3 meters of it, but they are, even though they're robin-sized, they're incredibly good at hiding. We did see quite a number of these elegant euphonia, but distantly, so I got no photos. And one bird that I really, really wanted to see on the trip was a trogon. And Edgar found us our first mountain trogon, a female, like this one in the upper right here, but not, but still, it was amazing to see. We also knew we wanted to get into the mountains of the Sierra Norte, north of the city, because the mountain forests have quite a few birds that are not found in the valley. And on that trip I took to the caves at Mitla, I asked our guides if they could recommend a birding guide in the mountains, and they suggested Lionel Bautista in the village of Capelalpan de Mendes. So we went to Capelalpan. It involved a 2-hour trip over 2 different collectivo routes, but it was definitely worth it, and we stayed for 2 nights. This was the view from our hotel. You see the steep streets, and again, quite a mix of territory, agricultural land, stuff around the village and forest, and then kind of scrub like this. Some of the birds we saw, these was our first pair of hepatic tanagers. So we saw 3 different kinds of tanagers. We later saw a red-faced tanager as well as the western tanagers here. The western tanagers that we also get in Vancouver were the most common ones there as well. They winter there. But these hepatic tanagers were very colorful. There's a female vermilion flycatcher. So we had the nice picture of the bright red male earlier. This brown-backed solitaire doesn't look like much, but man, they have an incredible song. They fill the whole mountain valley with their singing. It's quite amazing. And these gray silky flycatchers are very cool, cute birds that travel in flocks. We saw them in the city as well, but up here in the mountains. We had a nice view of this bat falcon perched on a radio tower. The radio mast is upright. I'm not very good at keeping my camera that way. But we saw it hunting. It was looking very intently at all the little birds flying down below and looking also for bats in the evening, apparently. And this northern mockingbird. So one cool bird that we saw, but didn't get a good picture, is this black-headed siskin. I didn't realize there were other kinds of siskins than our pine siskin, so that was a revelation for me. I'm sure a more educated birder would have known. They have these red warblers that are kind of endemic to the area. We saw the white-cheeked version. There's also a gray-cheeked version in other parts of Central America. That was a very cool bird to see. And one thing that really impressed me, this is the first place we saw these wood creepers. The wood creepers in Central America are about twice the size of our little brown creeper, and remind me a little bit of flickers as they go around. But anyway, very neat birds. We saw our first ones in Capilalpan there. But our month in Oaxaca City passed all too quickly, and our flight home was from Huatulco, so we had to start making our way down to the coast. We stopped in two places along the way that eBird showed us as birding hotspots. The first of these was San Jose del Pacifico. Michelle found a guide by looking at accommodations, and one of them had a birding tour, so we were able to arrange that. It turned out our guide was driving out from the Oaxaca City to do the birding tour for us for the day, so we caught a lift with her from the coast, which was fun. From the city out to San Jose. We spent a whole day with her in San Jose. We didn't have to leave the property of the resort, of the place that we were staying at. They had their own mix of garden and forest, and there were lots of birds. We managed to find 50 species. Most of them were familiar from earlier in the trip, but there were a couple of new ones that are sort of special to the region. There's a hummingbird called the bumblebee hummingbird for the noise it makes, and the long-tailed wood partridge. We only heard the wood partridge. It's apparently very rare to see them. Ones I did manage to get photos of, this white-eared hummingbird. We saw about 20 of those. That was the most common hummingbird we saw. This is the best photo I got of a mountain trogon, although we heard several of them and actually had better views than that. And another hepatic tanager here. Leaving San Jose, we headed down to Pluma Hidalgo, which is famous as a coffee growing region. Nearly all the growers in the region are small farmers who grow their coffee in the shade of larger trees, and that provides really great habitat for a lot of bird species. They're not registered as bird-friendly coffee, but definitely the growers there are mostly pretty bird-friendly. Getting there was a bit of a challenge, but after some effort, we managed to make our way there. And we saw quite a few birds. We managed to find 41 species, including a few that we had never seen before. So we had definitely seen Nashville warblers elsewhere in our trip, but I thought that was a good photo. This Altamira oriole, again, we had seen a couple other places, but there were several species of oriole here. These orange-fronted parakeets were new. It had been green parakeets back in Veracruz, but we saw a big flock of these guys. This flame-colored tanager was a pretty neat bird. My photo isn't great. It kind of looks like an oil painting of the bird, but you get an idea of what it looked like. It was sitting on a coffee plant. Those are coffee berries there. So that was also neat to see. And this is a different kind of trogon. So this is a collared trogon. He wouldn't turn his head for me, alas, so we didn't get a good view. You can really see the funky tail feathers, the bright red breast, the blue wings, the green back. They're amazing birds. They're roughly, the body's roughly the size of a robin, but obviously a much longer tail. And then there are these two different shots of the red-legged honey creeper. This is non-breeding plumage. In breeding plumage, these birds are jet black with brilliant red legs, but in the season we were there, they're this kind of green color. Still pretty cool birds. I'm not quite sure what that hummingbird is. I got only kind of a mediocre picture of this rusty sparrow, but it's a bird that's a little hard to see. It's endemic to the area, and I wanted to include it just to show that I wasn't taking only pictures of the colorful birds. We saw a fan-tailed warbler, which we didn't get a good view of. Didn't get a good picture of. This ruddy foliage gleaner flew along in the forest below the balcony from our hotel room, and I made quite interesting calls in the evening. So that's just a few of the birds that quite enjoyed that coffee plantation environment. The place itself was lovely, but the whole region suffered an awful lot from Hurricane Agatha that came through in May of 2022. It was the largest hurricane ever to hit the coast in Mexico in the month of May. And the torrent of water there scoured the vegetation from the banks of many streams. The water rushing over the roads undercut the roads. This road was about 20% undercut, so it was still in service. We saw other places where they were 50% undercut, or bridges that were washed out. A lot of damage. A lot of trees were lost from the plantation that we were in, which they regretted. But some beautiful views and just a lovely, lovely place to stay. There were also lots of non-bird wildlife, including insects and lizards. This is a termite nest, and the termites there, they have no melanin, so they can't take the sun. So they construct these tunnels along the branches of the trees so that they can go out about and do their business. Probably protects them somewhat from predators as well. It's kind of a cool thing. From Pluma, we caught another collectivo to take us down to the resort at Huatulco, which was about a little over an hour drive away. In Huatulco, we went out birding with guide Cornelio for one day. Cornelio has his own private wildlife reserve. He bought a chunk of land here that extends down to the river and down to that road you see down there, and quite a ways over to the right and then behind us as well. And he has quite a few bird species in there that are hard to find elsewhere in the region. So he's really dedicated to preserving the wildlife, which made us feel a bit better about the fact that he charged twice as much as any other guide that we hired during the course of the trip. But he was good, very knowledgeable, quite interesting. It's an iguana, beach at Huatulco. This is a river mouth where we went birding with this American couple, guided by Cornelio. Here we have tracks from a green sea turtle who had come ashore in the night to try to find a spot to lay her eggs. She apparently left that beach without laying, but they were hoping she was going to come back the following night. Huatulco has tried to be a bit of an eco-friendly resort, and they actually have people who watch the beaches. And if the nests are found, they will stake them out and protect them from tourists to make sure that they don't get trampled and damaged, and to protect the turtles. They do that at a number of beaches in the region. It's pretty good. This was a mountain biking trail through the national park, and you can see some of the coastal jungle. When we found in our few days in Huatulco, we saw 96 species, including 41 lifers. In our day outing with Cornelio, there were 77 species, so the majority of what we found. But we did see quite a number of others, including, again, in the city parks within the town where we were staying. This bird on the left here is a gray hawk. We got up quite close to it and had a nice view. The lovely woodpecker here is a pale-billed woodpecker. They're a lot like the extinct ivory-billed woodpecker that was in Florida. And anyway, I saw that in the city park in Crucecita. This owl here, you can just see its eye there. It would only show us its butt, but that's a ferruginous pygmy owl. We saw a lot of black vultures on our trip, but this was unusual. And black vulture was walking along the beach, looking like it was trying to do its best chicken impersonation. And I wish I had a better photo of this bird. It's a white-throated magpie jay. They are incredible. They are a bit over a meter long, from the top of this pointy crest here all the way to the tip of that very long tail. They fly about in large, noisy flocks, and they eat fruit and stuff, and they're very cool to see. This is a Kalima pygmy owl that Cornelio knew where it perched on his own private property. And this thing on the left here, looking a bit pigeon-like, is a common ground dove. Now, it has common in the name, but this is the only bird of that species that I saw on our whole trip. We saw lots of Inca doves and other doves. I even had good pictures of them that I didn't include here for brevity, but this common ground dove was neat to see. It's nice to see some different doves than what we get here. So we saw lots of other cool birds, of course. One of the most surprising was the yellow-winged cacique, which is shaped like a crow, but a lot more spectacular. But I will end my presentation here with this video of a female pale-billed woodpecker that I saw in the Parque Europeo Tamayo, a city park in La Crucecita, in Huatulco. This is a case where I think the female bird is actually more impressive than that male we saw earlier. She's got this nifty black crest that flips up as she does her business. And so I really enjoyed watching her do the excavation there. I was amazed at the large chips of wood that she could knock free with one peck. So a lot of the birds we saw on our trip were in city parks. It's surprising how much wildlife can survive in urban areas if we just leave them a bit of room. And it's remarkable how much you can see if you take your binoculars out and take the time to look. Anyway, I hope my presentation gave you some ideas for your next adventure. And I am happy to take any questions.